Thanks for joining me today on Waking Up Hispanic. This is a place where Hispanic men born or raised in the United States can freely speak about their emotions, challenges, and cultural experiences that shape our identity and our lifestyle. Today, I'm joined by Phil. He's our co-host on our very first podcast, and I'm very excited to have him on here. Phil, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, man, fantastic. You know how it is.
Oh, absolutely.
I can't
man.
complain living out here.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great, man. It's living the life, and just enjoying day by day.
Awesome, dude. Well, me and you, we have really got great conversations. This is about time that we come up with a platform for us to really get these recorded, share our messages with the people. And so if you're okay with it, let's just jump right into it. Okay.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited to get these messages out there, man. Help people.
Awesome, dude. All right. So I wanted to start off with a simple question. How would you define success, both in your personal and in your professional life?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess, to start that story off, I mean, we have to, I think, go to the beginning, right? Like when we think about the beginning, we think about, when we're growing up with our parents, and what they kind of define as what success is, right? Like we don't know about the world, so they come and they teach us in the best way that they can. And I think that, being here in the United States, having parents that were immigrants, like their definition of success, starts off as like, just get the education, because nobody's going to consider you, a successful person, or they may not even consider you in the room unless if you have that paper, that degree. And I think that, it's a good, when you on paper, it sounds nice, right? But the pressures of, do or fail mentality, right? Because they fought so hard to come to this country, and then they kind of see you almost like taken for granted some of the luxuries of living here compared to others. So it creates this huge, pressure on yourself to define success. And I think that, early on in my life, again, success meant you had to get the good education. You had to maybe eventually get the house, get married, right? Have a family. And, by definition, simple life, like that sounds good. But I think that overall, once you start, realizing what success actually translates to, it's freedom, right? And I think it's, there's three core principles that I think I go by. And success for me is like, freedom of choice, being able to just kind of like, control your schedule, control what projects you decide to work on, where you can define your path, your track that you're living on. There's a lot of people out there that, because of those pressures of success from your family, you kind of create this self pressure to, have to overachieve, because your parents taught you that if you're not the best one in the room, then nobody's going to take you seriously. And that kind of creates a certain level of imposter syndrome, if you will, because it makes you feel like, man, am I good enough? Like, am I being validated enough? Like, where are these people that my parents told me about that, we're gonna, point the finger and say I'm not good enough, like, and you start to realize that you go through, maybe a corporate life, or maybe you start a business, whatever it is, and you do it a lot of times for the wrong reasons. And so again, that's why I am defining these three core principles of freedom of choice, the positive impact that I put out into the world, and honestly, any type of holistic wealth. And holistic wealth is an interesting one because it sounds like it's money, but it's actually really family time, health, and just, the core principles of being a human, really. So wealth doesn't necessarily have to be defined by money, because a lot of people, they think by the time I reach my 30s, my 40s, I'm going to be a millionaire. I have all these career paths that I took, but money doesn't make you happy, and it doesn't even give you freedom of choice. In fact, sometimes you're probably happier making less money than making more money, because, sometimes with more money means more time investment. So success, I think, is just being a better human. And at the end of the day, those three core principles, I think, are the things that I align with, that I have found in my life that has worked.
Dude, that's awesome. And you know what? It's incredible because like you're so right. Like when we think about the Hispanic journey and Hispanic parents coming over here, they're leaving their country, they're looking for a new opportunity, they want to do better. And you know, I seem to find that like no matter what situation Hispanic parents leave, and this is from talking to friends of mine, things like that, they all seem to have this same idea that like you still have to do certain things to be successful, even as their kids. Like they left this country, they left these places for a better life, but yet they expect us to kind of make a lot of the similar choices that they did, right? Like maybe they find value in getting an education and all these things because that was their ticket to come here. But thanks to that hard work, like we're already here. And you know, that's one of the things that I definitely kind of had to reshape in my life, was like their level of or their definition of success really is like a base level. And I'm just really glad that they gave me the privilege to be able to say like, I want more than what that level is, right? Like education, yeah, sure, it's really important, but it's even more important to like what you do and to feel confident in what you're doing, and to know that no matter where you work, your identity isn't really what you work in. It's the type of person, the type of values and the morals that you kind of carry. And I think that was like you said, like early on, a big factor of success for me was just like, am I ticking off those things? Like, am I able to have a stable job? Am I earning more income every year? Am I able to purchase a house? Do I have a family? Is it too late? Like, am I too late to having a family? Should I already have kids? And it's kind of crazy because, you know, it took, you know, close to 5 to maybe 8 years for me to really even start questioning those things. Like it really wasn't until I lost my job that I was like, whoa, like, hold up a minute. I've been doing everything that I thought was right. And yet not only did I lose my job, but I feel like crap, you know, like I don't even know who I am anymore. Like, what do I do? And you know what that time was because you were a big part of, you know, helping me get to that stage, right?
Okay.
And so it's kind of awesome to hear you define it like that, because it almost feels like most of the Hispanics that I know have that same idea. And the real game changer for us is when we're able to say, you know what, maybe that definition of success is a little outdated. Let's try something new, you know? So let's dive into success a little bit more. Like, what would you say are like how do you think your family's definition of success played a role in your early career? Like, or maybe even your early decisions?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because, you know, I think every Hispanic family kind of goes through the, you know, the initial struggles of like, oh, you got to work hard, right? And there's kind of this concept of, you know, you got to work double as hard as, you know, the next person, you know, next to you, you know, but then also at the same time, you kind of have to keep your head down, you know, speak half as loud, if you will, right? So kind of this, I guess, term that I've coined, you know, work twice as hard, you know, speak half, you know, as loud, and somehow that you know, that translates to an interesting thing, because sometimes working hard isn't the you know, the definition of success in a lot of cases. And like I'm just gonna, you know, talk about my story here. Like my mom, you know, she worked in retail. You know, when she was in Colombia, you know, she was an accountant. You know, she had her degree, her bachelor's degree and everything. But coming here to America, you know, she had me, so she had to kind of drop the drive to, you know, work as hard to be a mom, you know, stay home mom, if you will. My dad was, you know, a factory worker. And they were all about, you know, you have to make sure you work hard so that, you know, you can punch above your weight, if you will. And what I ended up finding out is that this pressure created this weird thing for me, because, you know, my mom, you know, she worked like a part-time job at Toys R Us. You know, if you recall that store, you know, it's long gone now, but you know, at
Good
the end of the
memories
day,
there.
yeah, good memories, you know, good memories as our childhood. But you know, like it was one of those things that like I didn't get the concepts of the educate, like get the degree and all that stuff, even though they were putting that pressure on me. You have to get the degree and all that stuff, but leading by example is something that's important. Sometimes as a parent, you have to, like you can't just tell them you need to do this, you need to do that, but then you're not also preaching it. And that's a struggle, because how do our parents have the ability to tell us to, put this pressure of go to school, work really hard, but then you feel like the floor that they set is different than the one that they're setting for you, so you have nothing to compare against. And so this creates a giant gap in your understanding of how to operate, because you're operating based on your feeling of what you think they're telling you, but not an actual like hard book that you can be like, oh, these were the steps they took to get to the success that made them be what they are today. And so that gap that you leave to imagination can create a lot of pressure on us, right? It can create a lot of pressure in thinking when we need to do things, we're often going to make a lot of mistakes. I think that one of the benefits that you and I have been talking about over the years is that a lot of us feel that struggle, that we're in uncharted territory, and so when we're dealing with these emotions of like, how do we deal with unpacking some of the success that we have? Is it too much? Is it too little? Are we at the right spot in our life? Because like you were saying, like, am I too late to have a family? Am I too early? All those pressures really stand up, and for a lot of us, we don't have somebody to lean on, to see if we can explain those things that are going through our minds, because we're all figuring it out at the same time, so it's an interesting thing. But yeah, like I was saying, the success factor there plays a part, because if you don't have something to follow, like that, you can, like a mentor that can guide you through your positions, like or your mindset, like it's going to be challenging. It's going to be an endless struggle, and sometimes you find that in a partner, right? Like sometimes, like if you do find a spouse that you're with, like you're on the same journey sometimes, if you stay within your own culture, right? But in some cases, when you are outside of your culture, like that can also be a struggle too, because one thing that I've been learning over the years is generational knowledge, right? Or generational wealth. Again, nothing to do with money, but it's totally aligned with knowledge transfer between generations. And like, for example, you and I could have been born around the same years, and we're obviously experiencing life together at the same moment. But in the grand scheme of things, of generations, like let's say my parents came here much earlier than your parents, as an example. And so they already had their thing, and maybe I'm a second generation, and now what ends up happening is that even though we're growing up at the same time, they've transferred more knowledge of how to live in America compared to you, as an example. And growing up, I saw that a lot, right? We have a lot of families, especially Miami, being there's Cubans, that would come from Cuba. They came in the 80s, and now they're a second generation Cuban American, as an example. And so what ends up happening is that they have all the knowledge transferred from the previous generation that maybe was born here. And even though they're Cuban, they're Hispanic, they're not struggling as much in knowing how to operate in the world compared to the first generations that came to this country. So again, we may be the same age, we may be living in the same time, but in kind of this fake timeline, if you will, you're actually 45 years behind, because
Right.
a generation already came here before you and passed on that knowledge that you don't have to struggle to learn, right? And that's huge. It's huge, because even when you eventually meet somebody, right, like a spouse, who it may be a second or third generation of Hispanic American, their experiences that they're going to live are much different than your experience being the first generation that showed up here, even though you're the same age, right? And sometimes that can even be from the mindset of, how do I educate myself? How do I operate in work, business, my the things that I want, right? Like, you'll see somebody who just came to this country, even though they're smart, they make money, and let's say they can have the house, they can have the car. For them, it's like, I'm okay if I'm living in a basic apartment, nothing too fancy, right? But the other person who's been here for 2, 3 generations already might be like, man, just getting the house is nothing. Like, my ambition is to the moon, right? And then how do those two people commingle, because their success metrics are different, right? Like, my parents came here to survive, and I'm just passing on the baton, now to just maybe have a little bit more, right? And
Right.
and so your ambition has a ceiling, and eventually when you hit that ceiling, your grit starts to get lower, right? Because you've said you've achieved those successes. So there's also that side of it, right? Where you could be so fast to achieve the successes that your parents set you with, and then that's it. You cool off, and you don't have ambition to keep going. But then you have somebody by your side who's like, that's just the beginning. I'm looking at 10xing that. And so then that's another pressure, right? Like, that we haven't even jumped into, that you'll find, it's not just parents, but it's also spouse, success metrics. And then how does that affect you, right?
Dude, that's such an interesting point, because when I've thought about generational wealth, I've always compared it to like Hispanic versus like Caucasian. Like I've always, well, and maybe that my wife is Caucasian, so I mean, she was born and raised in the in Miami, and her parents were also kind of raised in Miami, and it's interesting because you're bringing up a really unique point about the different generations of Hispanics, the ones that are freshly arrived, the firstborn, the second generation, like those, you're 100% right. Like the third generation compared to someone that's freshly entered,
Yeah,
is going to be, there's a huge gap there.
right.
And that's a really unique point to bring up, because I've never thought of that uh being a thing. But now that you're thinking about it, like, Hispanics are like the fastest growing population in the US right now. I think we're upwards of like 30% of the population. And we've been coming in here for a while. And it's crazy because a lot of the times that I'm focusing on success, I'm comparing myself to people that I can't really relate to. And now that you're bringing up that point, it makes me think like, you know, is the best step for us to look up to people that are similar to us, but maybe have just been here a few more generations? Like, are we looking up to like the Gary V's and like the Tony Robbins and these people? Is it a positive impact for Hispanics like us? And should we be doing a better job of trying to find impactful people that are maybe, like you said, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 generations ahead of us, that have kind of overcome what we're talking about, but have also reached a level of success that I think is more manageable or more accomplishable for people like us. So that's a really, really interesting point. And man, it makes me want to write a blog about that, because that's so interesting. So I mean, when you think about success, you mentioned it earlier, like freedom of time, freedom of relationships. I remember my dad saying just being able to support your household was a big metric for success. Working a lot of hours was a badge of honor and a work and kind of like almost like a justification for, maybe not being able to be as present in the house as possible. So it's really interesting that what we define as success now is, I've heard it from my dad. It's like, it's almost considered like lazy, right? Like we don't, like, we want to earn more, work less, and then have a lot more time on our hands. And I think it's interesting because when I have these conversations with my dad, you can kind of tell that like they just can't comprehend a world where you work for 4 hours in a day and you do this for 4, maybe 5 times a week, and you're earning triple or quadruple of what they earned back in their day. And it makes me question, like, is there a point where our parents and things like that, is there a point where they understand, or they can accept this? Because I don't know about you, but like, it affects my relationship with my dad and my family, right? Like, the fact that they can't comprehend the difference in the definition of success, it affects our relationships, right? Because when I lost my job, even though I started working with my wife's law firm, we grew, we were like 3xing the firm, we were doing a great job there. I was not only stable, but we were having experiences. And yet, in the eyes of my dad, because I was staying home taking care of my son, he didn't consider that successful. And he would always ask me, like, when are you going to apply for a job? Or when are you going to go back to work? And it was almost like impossible for him to understand that, like, I was working. I was working in a new definition of work and productivity, and something that aligned more with my life. And so, have you had experiences with your family where, you almost get to a point where you're just like, just forget it. I just can't even talk to you guys about it because you can't even understand the world I live in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that so back in, I think it was 2014, I was let go from, at the time it was, my dream job. I was working at Apple, and I got let go because of, one issue or another. But basically during that time period, I was out of work for about a year, right? And I succumbed to having to kind of self-heal. I didn't know it at the time that that's what I was doing, but my body just naturally wanted to self-heal from the hurt of losing, like, this was my peak, right? Like, at the time, thinking I'm working for the most prestigious company, like I'm wearing it as a badge of honor, and all of this, is coming from the fact that, again, those pressures of success from the parents, right? Because, again, like you said, you got to work twice as hard so that you can achieve, these praises, if you will, or working for a company, that's known around the world. And so Apple, out of all companies, right? Like, this is the company you want to work for, and I'm no longer working for them. And it was definitely, a lot of back and forth with my mother, like, she would look at me and say, like, "Well, like, that's it, you're just gonna, give up, like, you're gonna end life." She wouldn't understand the pause, right? She wouldn't like acknowledge that, like, we have to heal. There's such a big gap in emotional intelligence for that generation, I would say, because it was like frowned upon to speak about your emotions and speak about how you feel about things, because in their case they didn't have a choice. They had to survive to live, and their parents basically made them, it was like a fight or flight, mechanism for them. Like, they had to go back to work, they had to show effort. But it's also a different time, like, I think that, as generations keep moving forward, we have to understand that life actually does become easier, right? Like, if we look at the last 4,000 plus years, the average job back then, you had, you know, blacksmiths, masonry people, shipbuilders, there was a lot of hands-on work. And over the years, technology and advancements, make things easier. The understanding of, psychology, philosophy, things like that allowed civilization to just move forward in understanding that you had to be more emotionally intelligent. You had to understand that, you had to, make life easier. There's no reason why the next generation has to work harder than the last, because then what's the point, right? You have to come back to, what's the point of humanity, of, every year having to put out children to keep moving life forward, right? Like, we want to make life easier for those that are ahead,
To
but
evolve.
to evolve, right? Now, I do agree that to a certain point, there's this famous saying, right? Like, if those that get fed are never hungry, it translates to, if you smother your kids and you don't allow them to ever feel hard work, that they're never going to want to work, right? And there is a certain truth to that, but at the same time, you want to also make sure that you're not necessarily putting the pressure on your kids that they need to always be productive in the sense of work, but they have to keep the mission going of how can we make the next generation, less burden on them, if you will. And how that becomes true can be in any way. And I think that that's what we're understanding in this day and an age, is that we're understanding that how to make the next generation less burdened doesn't have to be just through work. It has to be even just being a better person, being able to create better connections. And ultimately, the way I see things and in my personal life, I'm defining how I'm doing this about how many doors I can open for others, and especially for people that look like me, right?
Right.
And so this is something, the way I see it is, we're entering this new world of like AI, right? And AI is breaking down these taboos across the board, like where somebody couldn't do something before because they had a limitation to access of information. Yes, when google.com came out, 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, or whatever, when it blew up, yeah, that unlocked information. But the reality, it was just people like you and I creating blogs on the internet, and just putting information. So it was still an exchange of information, but it was very limited on experiences and whatever just showed up on the front page of Google. Now you have an AI that you can literally interact with back and forth in natural conversation. And I think that that's going to help a lot in creating, a therapy machine, for a lot of this, like if you can't go to your parents, like you were saying earlier, you can bust out your AI and you can start having the conversation with it. And that's going to help you out so much in being able to get through some of these things. So we just talked about generational gaps and the generational wealth of knowledge that gets transferred. AI is going to compress that, right? So if you were speaking to somebody that was 3 generations ahead, compared to you, now you can have that therapy session with your AI and see how you can close that gap. So I think that there's a lot of great, things coming forward, and that's going to help us out here.
Dude, I love that. And I love that point that you made about, how, there was this old thought that you can't smother your kids. You don't want them to, not, if you do that, they're not going to have a healthy, relationship with the outside world and things like that. And I love that we clarified that that's not the case. And it's interesting because science backs that up, right? Like science shows that as long as you can emotionally spoil your child.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's different than materialistic spoiling, but you can emotionally spoil your child. It's okay to give them a lot of hugs, a lot of I love yous.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because going back to the topic of success, it sounds like our definition of success has evolved from what our parents thought, which was basically survival, stability, to now it's like emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, and getting to a point where you can understand, how your time is being used. Is it used efficiently? What are you using your time for? Is it just to stay stable at work, or are you using it to have stable relationships? And you're 100% right about the technology evolution. I think that's going to be the next step. I think it's so interesting that like we're these next generations of Hispanics that are starting to become more emotionally cognizant. And then as we become emotionally cognizant, we're probably going to get this technology to a point where it's emotionally cognizant. So it's almost like an evolution of, it's like a human evolution and a technological evolution going on at the same time, And so, just to wrap this up, because we're getting to the end of our time here, our next session, our next topic is going to be on emotional intelligence. And so it's really great that we're ending our session now, going from what's our definition of success and how emotional intelligence plays a big factor in the Hispanic journey, right? Where we are we're late to the party. We're late to the party of the awareness of emotions, right? And so we're going to take a deep dive into that in our next conversation. Do you want to close us out with some final thoughts? Do you have any advice that you would give to Hispanic men trying to look for balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to creating, success, I mean, we talked about a lot of good points, but I think at the end of the day, we just need to lift each other up. And like I said, I see myself as being somebody who opens the doors for people, because success isn't about money anymore. You know, sure, you have to have your baseline of, you know, survival, like, you know, you have to have your food, you have to have your house, the roof over your head. But I think at the end of the day, we have to be honest with ourselves that money doesn't make you happier. You know, success is going to be defined by, again, it's those three core metrics that I found that are the biggest thing. You got to make impact in the world so that you feel happy about what you do. You got to have that freedom of choice to be able to pick your schedule, pick your projects that you want to work on. And of course, be surrounded by family. You know, holistic wealth. That is going to be your best approach. Because otherwise, like I said, you can work really hard for the job, and I guarantee you, if you see yourself always climbing a ladder, you're climbing that ladder because you feel like you are, you know, trying to make more money, seeking that thing that your parents told you, and you're never going to find it. You have to just cap yourself and go horizontal and find the thing that makes you happy. Find that within yourself, you know, and that's it, you know. So that's where
Dude, I
I
love it.
believe, you know, our Hispanic people, you know, they need to find happiness, you know, and I think that we'll be successful in life. Nobody can break you
Right.
down.
And no, I love that, man. That's such a powerful statement. And I think, you know, if I could summarize it, it would be, you know, when our parents got here, they had to be put into an auto loop of how to work and how to survive here, because they just wanted to blend in. They just wanted to survive. And our goal as a new wave of Hispanics is to break out of that loop and start finding our true identities and spending more time with the things that make us happy, so that we don't waste a lot of that time and we can invest it back into these new generations or back into the people that are struggling like us. So again, thanks a lot, Phil. Thanks for joining us today on our episode of Waking Up His Panic. And we're going to go ahead and see you next time when we talk about emotional intelligence in the Hispanic community. And so thank you again. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.